Patience. All right, everybody. Happy Monday, November 18th. We hope you are well wherever you may be. My name is Albert of Albert's List, and I will be your host today. And you are here for the October 2024 job search and inflation update with a little bit of recap on how this last election went, the sentiment of America, your questions, and more. And with us, as always, is Dr. Reilly White, who is joining us from the University of New Mexico. He is a very esteemed scholar and has been with us for quite a while now. If you don't know who he is, go look him up on the Eventbrite page, and you can see all of the things that he has done. So, today we're going to talk about some topics that are incredibly important to the state of the economy and our incoming presidency, since we now have changes that have come across our country with Donald Trump being swept back into power. And so without further ado, with all of the data, all of the analysis and answers to your questions, I give you Dr. Reilly White. Over to you.
All right, thank you, Albert. Boom goes the dynamite. I'm so excited to see everybody here today. We're going to rock and roll with this monthly jobs report and economics carnival. As you can see here, and I know I'm going to keep this. This might be hard for some of you. My very, very wide screen compresses this weirdly on some of your monitors, and I apologize for that. But bear with me, and it's going to be fine. So here's what we got. This is the not too distant future. Albert's List jobs report. Albert's List becomes all powerful, but wait, there's only 5 jobs. That's what each of those 5 people represent in this thing, and none of them are in software engineering. So this is what we got. So we're going to talk a little bit about the jobs report we had this month. We're going to talk a little bit about how it looks, things we're going to consider. I got some questions I got to answer from the audience, and as always, if you got a question, drop it right there into the chat window, and we will rock and roll that thing. And I will do my best to answer it. No such thing as a dumb question. And if I don't answer it, Aaron will, because he's out there. He runs interference better than any human being I know. So we're going to do that, and I'm super, super jazzed about this. Let me just move my Zoom window around a bit so I can see some of this, some of these chat windows here, just so I don't miss them. Screen. Okay. So now here's what we got. What a disappointing jobs report this was, but we knew it was coming. We had strikes, we had storms, we had everything, finagling, conspiring to make the job market kind of crappy last month. We only added about 12,000 jobs. That is effectively losing jobs when we have population growth. We lost 46,000 in manufacturing. And I know we got a lot of things. We talked about, longshoremen strike. We talked about other strikes. There was a machinist strike. Ellen thinks of the machinist. Look at that. 46,000 fewer manufacturing jobs. 47,000 fewer in professional and business services. That's more nefarious. That's an element of the economy that affects all kinds of industries. So that's your accountants, your marketers, your servicers, all those other people that end up in that category fall into that zone. And it's fascinating to see. This is really interesting. Lucy says, if California is the 6th largest economy in the world, why does it seem we are being gaslit and told that the economy is doing well? Silicon Valley and tech must represent a huge amount of jobs lost. And you're not wrong, Lucy. That's the hard part. The economy is never sunshine and rainbows for everybody. At most, the sun can shine over a large amount of area. We still have some shady areas. Because tech in particular is very volatile. A lot of ups, a lot of downs. When the market changes or when interest rates go up and other things happen, they're the canary in the coal mine. The first companies to step back, the first companies to limit their capital planning, because so much of their value and growth depends on expectations of future capital, where money's going to come from and how it sloshes around. A lot of that capital dried up once it got expensive, and a lot of firms were in a holding pattern during the last few years as they waited for interest rates to drop. And so they haven't bounced back in the way that we expected or hoped for. But information as a whole added a net total of 3,000 jobs last month. 3,000. Where are they? They're not in California. They're not in Texas. Where are they? Probably somewhere. Maybe Idaho, because I don't know where those are, but they aren't happening on a widespread basis. We have, and I apologize for being sick. I am just this thing. I got every virus imaginable. It combined into me, and I am fighting them off one by one. We're adding 51,000 in health workers and $40,000 in government work. It's like a broken record every single month. We're adding health, 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 health. There's one sector I have a question about. What sectors are going to do well in the next year or two, even with this new administration? That's a great question. I have healthcare and social assistance, and by that I mean mainly healthcare in particular, is going to do continually well because we don't have an answer for high medical costs yet. We don't have an answer or an anticipated answer anytime soon for demographic issues, general health issues. As I sit here, I'm like coughing and I'm like, I promise. I'm let's talk about health issues. I'm a walking health issue right now at this moment. No, it's we're adding 51,000 jobs here, and it was the number one sector last month and the number one sector the month before because it is in such demand, and it is going to continue to be in such demand until either regulation changes, we figure stuff out. I don't know, and that's going to be a really, really hard part to look at this as well. As Albert points out, the Department of Government Efficiency will be hiring. You read Elon Musk post for Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, 80-hour weeks for cutting a lot of government jobs. And that's interesting how that will transpire. I actually find that fascinating how they will evaluate what government waste is and what it looks like. Here in New Mexico, we've got two large national labs, Sandia and Los Alamos. Sandia, the twin sister, Lawrence Livermore, other places like that. There's a lot of places in the country that have very complex scientific research projects going on. And it's curious how someone like Elon Musk will evaluate those in time. So the labor force, though, in general, we had a pretty good month last month. This month was not so good. We're bouncy, but we're on a downward trajectory. The economy, Lucy, you're not being gaslit. It is getting worse. It is physically getting worse. And participation actually fell slightly as well, signing that people are actually not adding to the market. When we lost 0.1%, that's people dropping out of the market, people retiring from the job market. We can only count unemployed people as people who are out there looking for jobs. We also had some other bad news in this report. Read down at the bottom, we had downward revisions. August, the September numbers that we were jazzed about, revised downward 31K. The August numbers we were less jazzed about, revised downward 81,000. That's a net total of 112,000 jobs that we thought we had that we don't have anymore. So you can see where this is falling. Now, a lot of the strikes and storms are going to go away next month. So I won't expect manufacturing and professional business services to look that bad. I'm hoping for a bounce on some of those rehires. And that'll keep us afloat, I think, in our November report. But then in our December report, I'll be really interested to see how we go through the holiday season. So we're really, really in a position right now where there's a lot going on. And unfortunately, it is still, we're piloting a plane downward. We are landing a jet plane. It is going downward. We feel it. You feel it. And there is not yet a change in sight to this particular trajectory. Another way to look at this, is it a bad economy or a good one? If you have lost your job recently, many people did. Many competent, smart individuals have as well. Oh my gosh, it's Colin Moe, everybody. Woo, yeah. Hey, Colin, welcome aboard. If you've lost your job recently and you've gone to Albert's List, you're networking, you're doing those things, you're upskilling, you're getting degrees, you're thinking about dropping into that CFA or PMP or something other program, you're distinguishing yourself on the job market. There's a lot of things to say. I want you to take a look at this chart here. In blue, these are the number of permanent job losers. These are people who are long-term unemployed that have been unable to find work. And this number, which shoots up during a recession, has been going up at a steady, steady clip. Now almost 2 million people. So you are in good company. And it is not just you. And the number of people on temporary layoffs have been relatively steady. This is not a crazy number. This looks no different than 2011 or 2012. But the permanent job losers, people who have been out there without a job 4 months on end, have become much more common. And I need to reiterate, there's a lot of reasons for this as well. So I was telling you a little bit about it. I was talking to one of my very exceptional, genius level former students out there this week. And she was saying, she lives in Texas, that the importance of the job market has been cut out in a lot of interesting places. People with experience in tech companies, in places like California and Texas, in places like project management, have been just swept aside. They've been cut out as part of that issue. Firms, when they hire, are hiring entry level. They're not hiring those people with experience. And so you find yourself, ironically, in a role where you're competing with a bunch of other people with a lot of experience right now for very few available jobs. This turns around when the companies feel more confident about the market, when capital flows a bit freer. So we need to look for a few things in the marketplace to change to get some of this happening. Albert says, I have a friend who's been out of work since June. The employers are beginning to ask what she has been doing in the meantime. The discrimination is starting. Absolutely. Don't let them think you're sitting around anywhere, because you're not. You're sending out applications and doing stuff. You're upskilling, you're networking, you're doing stuff. Found that LLC that you wanted to do for a while, and then do some consulting along the sides. Make sure you've got something on your resume to show you've been rocking and rolling. Here's the other thing as well. For tech, it's been a story of layoffs for the last 2.5 years, but no mass rehiring. So once you've been laid off, you've been part of a smaller and smaller pool, and it has not come back. And so this is, everybody knows layoffs.fyi, very fun site, very horrifying site, fun site to watch. But looking at the numbers right now, we don't see a large number of companies or employees laid off. That is the quasi-silver lining, is that the axe has been cut for a lot of people, and it's not getting stronger. And we got a few of them out there like Intel, and we got a few bad news bears coming out recently with some bad reports, especially on some layoffs. But in this particular case, what's fascinating is they've been still cutting, and the jobs have not just come back on the other side. And so you see a lot of people, like Albert's friend, who have been out of work for months, that have not been able to find a job. Colin.
Do we expect the jobs to come back? I think that's the first question.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So the question is, so for the sake of like society and humanity, are the jobs going to come back? Are they forever lost? That's the question. Forever lost, the story of the tech sector. I got 5 degrees, I can't use them. No, I promise you. So here's the thing. No, it shouldn't be forever. But right now, the mechanics around tech, around startups, around the way that these things work and the way that these companies are thinking, the math looks poor from a rehiring standpoint. You need companies to invest strategically in positions like seasoned project managers, like people who have been out there for some time, like engineers with experience, software engineers, other things. We know we've seen some particular atrocious numbers when it comes down to tech layoffs. So software engineering, back-end development, consumer-facing applications, due to shifts in market demand and profitability challenges. These are temporary things. Again, tech is the canary in the coal mine. It sees things before the rest of the economy does. When we value a company, tech is all future growth, future potential. That means risk. And when anything changes, the expectation of interest rates, the expectation of the growth of a particular product or service, that completely reevaluates the infinite series of valuations that we do to make this company work. So as a consequence, even small effects in interest rates have big effects on how the company sees itself and how investors see value within those companies. But if your specialties like tied to data science, cloud infrastructure, security, still highly sought for their importance. And I mean, digital transformation stuff, cloud migration, high priority across industries, but layoff data tends to be really fluid. And so tracking this tech landscape in real time, yields kind of a clearer picture, but it doesn't really show these decisions that are happening at the margin. And that's why I've been fascinated hearing some of these anecdotal stories from Albert's list, from grads I know in tech. Other people from doing this have been fascinating. Albert asks if I'm hiring interns. Interestingly enough, I had this opportunity to hire a research assistant. And I thought about it, and I'm like, I don't have time to supervise a research assistant. So I said, no, I'm responsible for somebody not having a research job at this moment. Sean says there are far more tech people. There'll be tech jobs for the foreseeable future. Tech party's over. People need to move on and don't look back, says Sean. Oh, man. Look at that. Albert says that the Fed keeps lowering interest rates. Then yes, I agree. But they may not. And I'll give you a couple incidents of why not. But the way we anticipate Trump to spend money, install tariffs, the cost of things are on their way back up, but there will be an appetite. Will there be an appetite to raise rates, or will Trump intervene? It's really hard. Trump wants to intervene in the way the market works. But the Fed is an independent body. He doesn't even have the right. I mean, you want to fire Jerome Powell or put one of his cronies in. But the way that they operate from a governance standpoint is as an independent body. They're focused on that 2% inflation rate and full employment. However, inflation has gone down, but it's kind of leveled off. And so there's some question as to whether they'll continue to push the down button or risk reigniting inflation. And the tariff side of things might also reignite inflation, and that will keep rates from going down as well, which will be really interesting to see that feedback loop of horror that might happen and affect the rest of the market. There's a lot of risk right now, and it's unclear to see how this is going to pan out. And this is right. Aaron says with tariffs coming, absolutely. Global FX risk is through the roof. That's absolutely true. Oh man, ergo many, and I mean many tech jobs will never return. Zero value added. Well, it is. Okay. Lots of things happening in the chat window today. So that's this guy.
Do we expect the incoming administration's stated economic policies to be good or bad for the job market?
That's a great question. So let's break that down. So the question is not why the election was. We know I got the election in one chart here, right? You know, when we ask consumers one question, do you prefer your personal income to go up or prices to go down? 2/3 of consumers say prices go down. Now, if you're an economist, you hear prices go down, you have a heart attack. You go, oh, prices going down. Because prices would go down in the event of an economic catastrophe, like the demand for a product or service just drops from the market. And so the fascinating part about this discussion is the way that people think about this and the way that people think about economies. Now, to answer Colin's question, it depends to what extent the incoming administration's economic policies will in fact be enacted. If there is a broad swath of tariffs across the entire economy, which again, I'm being apolitical here when I say that I got a stack of economic research that's 6 feet tall that says that's a bad idea. You shouldn't do that. You don't do that with the tariffs. That tariffs right now, most of our goods that we actually have in this space are what we call intermediate goods. They're unfinished, which means that it affects businesses. Businesses pass that down to consumers. It makes everything more expensive. That's bad for jobs, as it turns out. So bad for jobs in aggregate. And we can go back to the steel when we put tariffs on steel, and that helped save some steel worker jobs, but then we lost more jobs in the auto sector and everywhere else that use steel because of those added prices. And so we would have a less dynamic market that way. Now, I'm going to pause that for a second because there's a certain credibility, certain disbelief among people in the field that'll be like, oh, they won't really do that. There are ways one can manage a policy around this that won't kill the market. For instance, you could be selective about tariffs. And then you have this weird sort of system of favoritism where the president decides, hey, these industries get tariffs and these don't. That might happen, and that will dampen the effect of tariffs on the economy. Taxes are interesting and government efficiency are interesting. So it is true, we should take a look at our government budgets from the sense of sustainability over the long run. There will be, depending on the level of activity, we know from, for instance, looking at furlough data, when we have failed to agree on a budget and government workers get furloughed, we know that has a tangible effect on the economy. So if we laid off, a couple million workers for the government somewhere, that would have a real effect on the economy, consumer spending, other things as well. It may put us in a recession. So it's interesting to see the speed at which they do it, the nature of what they do it, even if the results might, who knows, in the long run be positive, being optimistic. I don't know, maybe not. But I think it's going to have some pain here. And there's a lot more sources of risk now than there were before. And so, and that's kind of the unpredictable nature of this particular election. But this particular chart is what this is. Albert has some good points here too. Credit card debt's high. Oh, this is true as well. I forgot to quote this. So right now, interestingly enough, we have the tale of two economies. So we talk about the economy being good or bad. The consumer spending has been high and it has remained surprisingly high. But that's being driven by the top 20% of households by income, straight across the board. If you're in the bottom 20% of households, the top 20% of households are doing 40% of the spending right now. On the bottom 20%, we're seeing people cut back. We're seeing people spend less than they were before. And Albert notes this as well. The credit card debt's high. Indeed, it is rising, particularly among those who are living paycheck to paycheck. The Trump administration kept it simple. You want to raise your family, raise your kids, and have some left over at the end of the month. Meanwhile, the Democrats were talking about democracy being threatened, abortion, and other downstream issues. True, this is the interesting part. We know that this change of experience is why we had the election. Look at the way the election was. And so the Democrats have to do this soul searching now about, what did we do? How did we communicate this? And at the same time, there's some real factors in here that have a big effect on this. Now, I can go back to 1997, where the Nobel Prize winning economist Robert Shiller, who incidentally, personally, not a fan of. I emailed him when I was a PhD student before he won the Nobel Prize and was cool. And it was like, hey, I've got $2,000. Can you come speak to us? He was at Yale. I was at University of Connecticut, 45 minutes away. And he didn't even answer me. So I'm like, oh, I was ghosted by Schiller. I was really hoping I could bring him up. So I have this like personal thing against him. He doesn't think about me at all. But every time I think Robert Schiller, I think, he made a powerful enemy that day. But he made this study in 1997. And he said, if the government were to make a mistake next year, such as printing too much money, and they created prices that were 20% higher than they are today, I think they should try to reverse their mistake and bring prices back down to where they are today. So this top line is all Americans. 46% fully agree, 22% mostly agree. So you got 68% of people who are on the agree side. Yeah, bring down prices. This bottom line is economists. Economists, 0% fully agree, and the vast majority completely disagree on this. And that's kind of what we're looking at this. As well, this differentiation between the perception of inflation. So while, yes, inflation has gone up, we have prices that are indeed coincidentally 20% higher than we were 4 years ago. People feel that. That's the nexus at which they feel. They want prices to come down. We do not have, and I have to say this 100 times over, a way to bring prices down in the economy without a catastrophic economic circumstance, i.e. a recession, something like that. A great recession to bring prices down that much. Prices go up and they stay up. They don't go back down. There's nothing this president or that previous president or some future hypothetical president can do to make that happen other than crashing the freaking economy. And so that's important to note in this particular case. This is good. Rachel, good. Thank you for sending this link as well. Profits are at record highs, so why are tech companies laying off so many workers? Interesting. This is a fascinating, a really fascinating article and observation that's been made too, and I'm glad you brought this up. And this is interesting. We've got vacancies, we've got people not paying their fair share, we've got concentrations of wealth in certain areas. All of those things certainly factors that we should look at more. And it's tricky, Rachel said. And the question is the personal cost, right? So we know that companies are private, they operate under efficiency mechanisms. They will try, of course, to maximize their profitability and shareholder increases. That's sort of how they operate. But, and then Jessica says, well, no, wait a sec, prices go up and there's room for a competitive good to undercut them. Interesting. So the question is, are you implying that did prices go up because the market was non-competitive? Is a good question, Jessica. It's a good question. In this particular case, for consumer goods, we've got a pretty free market in consumer goods. For saying this. And if we go back in time and look at even things like real estate, which again, biggest single chunk of price increases, we actually only have a handful of years where they've actually declined in value over the last 100. I mean, physically 8 years, and even then by very small percentages. They don't typically come back down. Now, if you're talking about, on the other hand, the tendency for technological development to reduce the price of a LCD television, that's a factor that happens. But in aggregate, when we think about prices, meaning that the price of a basket of goods, and I'm speaking economic ease here, so that's where we might see some differentiation. We're talking about things that are representative of the basket that people buy. So they might be things like food, they might be things like televisions, but also TV, but also housing and shelter, among other things. And there just is not a precedent for that outside of a major recession. Just doesn't happen that way. And you can do a competitive good and reduce prices, and certainly technology advances, but prices themselves, I will not see, for instance, a meaningful decline in prices. I mean, apart from commodity changes and other things, in aggregate across the economy. There's nothing I can do, no lever I can pull to drop 20% to bring us back to where we were in 2019 without demand being robbed of the system. Supply and demand. More demand for something that increases prices. So if supply is still there, the demand would have to drop considerably, and that only happens during a recession. And so it's tricky, really, really tricky. So what do we know about this election? Every governing party and facing election in a developed country this year lost vote share. The first time, indeed, this has ever happened. You've seen this chart floating around on the various medias, but this is from the Financial Times. This year, we actually saw, so second biggest reason, the second chart of the election is the party in charge during inflation has done terrible in the elections following inflation. Bam. And so the US is one of them. And in fact, the ruling party, in this case, the Democrats, did not do as poorly as many other parties did. We all know how we saw the conservatives just being utterly demolished in the UK earlier this year. And we saw, of course, the same thing happened in Japan and, of course, across the world in different democracies. And this is really, really interesting. Oh, interesting. So this is a concern. So the sort of onus for us, if you're looking in with a tech-centered mindset around this, trying to evaluate and say, hey, I think the Fed will continue to lower rates, and if you're sitting there and you're running a tech company and going, well, maybe I'll grow some more, you're hoping that rates drop. Interestingly, inflation declines have started to level off, and if we look at this chart from Goldman Sachs, we're looking at a lot of these values have really started to flatline for us here. Core goods are down, which is very nice. Core services ex housing are okay, but housing itself still pulling down, but not pulling down anywhere near where it should be. If we get increased, this is the weird cart horse thing. The mortgage rates typically follow the 10-year bond. 10-year bond has been weird. It's been choppy because first it was oversold and it was overbought. We had all these kind of shenanigans happening with it. And so the Fed controls one interest rate, overnight lending to big banks. They call it the discount rate. That's the only one they do. Has a ripple effect on all the other rates in the system. So when the Fed gets excited about, trying to stimulate the economy and they lower the rates just a little bit, that's how they do it. They reduce the cost of capital. It helps money flow into the system, but they don't want too much money to flow into the system because then we get inflation. If there's too much money floating around and no place to go, that's where inflation happens. And so the Fed right now is sitting on the situation where they're looking at the inflation numbers, looking at the economy numbers. The economy looks like it needs stimulation. The inflation on the other side of it looks like it's leveling off a little bit. And if certain economic policies come through, like if we input tariffs tomorrow and do other things, that might actually reignite inflation. And so then we'd have to increase rates. And so there's a really, really awkward line the Fed has to walk through this particular position right now. And this is of my greatest concern, I think, because we need to get housing costs lower. We need to either build more housing, which for a number of reasons, the country stands in its own way and doing. The zoning sucks, the political will around it sucks, and all these other things. So that means that we have to have more inventory in housing. We have to increase the supply of available housing to help reduce and correct some of these price increases we've seen. Now, that's hard to do because nobody wants to sell their home because they've got sweet, cheap mortgages. And so rates have to come down to incentivize people to offer their house for sale. On the other side of that, we need to see inflation to continue to go down. And to do that, we need more of those houses offered for sale. And so cart, horse, we're trying to figure this out. In the meantime, the Fed is watching their watch going, I don't know what to do next. And what are we going to do? And, what's going to happen here? And there's a whole bunch of things that can happen economically that'll throw this off the wagon. But right now we've leveled off. We need to show more declines. Housing is still pricey. Housing increases are still out there, and we're going to talk about why that is. And at the same time, we're struggling with an answer to what the new administration is going to do with the economy next. I may have missed it, but did someone ask, so what's the best response for when things get 20% more expensive? There's no best response. Best response is wages go up 25%. That's the best response.
So the best response is raise wages?
Wages growing up faster than inflation increases wealth in general. So that's the goal. We have that right now. Wages are increasing faster than inflation. We didn't have it for about 2 years. And in that
Should
2-year slice, that's where people feel it.
should Congress raise minimum wage then?
Interesting. So that's an interesting question. So I looked at over 100 papers in this because I have students who ask me about this. And the research on this shows that raising minimum wages does have some effect on the way that like firms choose to behave. So they give people fewer hours instead, that are working in the restaurant industry or service sector industry. And they try to get around it in clever ways. They make them part-time. They hire less. It also means they hire fewer teenagers. So we see the most job losses in minimum wages and people with very little experience. Because if you have a choice between a teenager and somebody with years of experience being like a waitress, you want somebody with years of experience. So in short, it is a huge deal. And there's not a inflationary effect I would expect that would be driven substantially by the mere aspect of raising minimum wages. It's just not, when we look at the scope of income in the United States, the number of percent of people earning minimum wage, it just isn't enough to like move the needle in the same way that other big aggregate effects in the economy. Albert says, I always see it as a battle between employers who want to pay the least possible versus employees who want to make the most they possibly can. I like this possibly true. And restaurants are a good example where this plays out. And they have like a net profit margin on average of like 2 or 3%. Jessica says, what does changing top income tax rate do? Oh my goodness, it gives more money to very wealthy people, Jessica. That's the short answer to this. So that's a really interesting question because the expectation is, and I had a chart from last time about this, and I don't think I put it in this, but oh man. So let's go back for a second here because I didn't cover this one. But when we talk about that, when we change the top income tax, this is an interesting debate going back to the 1980s. There was an economist named Arthur Laffer who created the Laffer curve, which is the idea that if you put taxes too high, people shirk it so much that they start leaving and they start paying fewer taxes. And so this has been toyed around and batted around as kind of a thing. So many people have argued, especially if you're of the conservative mindset, you're like, well, we got to cut top tax brackets. Our top tax bracket in the 1950s was 94%. And we've been dropping that since 94% for the last 50 years or so. It has resulted, and there's a few things that have happened because of that. The redistributive nature of the economy was reduced. We have more inequality now than we used to 50 or 60 years ago. And tax policy is part of that. But also on that side, we can't ignore it. It's one aspect of the economy. We also have to look at how we spend that money and how that money ends up being spent in the system. And that's sort of that change. So people will say, let's lower taxes, or I want to lower taxes for these reasons. And then we'll say, well, I want to raise taxes to support the kind of things and government needs that I think our society should do. But we need to do that efficiently. And that's a very big debate among even economists as to what represents the optimality there. So Lucy says, I noticed that Trump met with Argentina's president. Milei. Argentina's inflation slowed a lot. And Milei's right. And this is true. So here's the thing about this. The Argentinian economy was so poorly managed for so long. Just the type of things the Argentinian leader has been doing have been enough to help bring down confidence and do it. You can inject someone like that into that economy and it will improve it. And that's the fun part. But there's the hard part. You can go too much on one side of this thing. So I don't think he's the devil in that sense. I don't think he's bad. He certainly has reduced inflation and stabilized the currency and done a lot of things in the market. How this can be continued is challenging. And we're not in the same thing. The United States itself is not Argentina. And I want to point that out as well. We haven't suffered under the many decades of poor negative economic performance. And in fact, over the last few years, we lead the G7 in both GDP growth and labor productivity growth, which is very impressive. Rachel, another cool link. Interesting chart. CEOs now make 296 times what a worker makes. Does that make sense to anyone? Very interesting. The value in society and the systems they're in. All the agreements we have. Do we face the realities of being poor? Do we protect the possibility of becoming rich? Colin, you have a good point here. You want to drop it? People need to hear a voice.
Joking about the price age thing. So how expensive can we tax gas so then I don't have to deal with traffic during rush hour? And then can we use the proceeds to build better public transportation?
So there was a group. This was fashionable back when I was impressionable finance dude. There is something called the Pigovian tax, named after our British economist Arthur Pigou. That basically is the idea that we put really, really high taxes on stuff that's bad for society. So we put high taxes on tobacco, high taxes on sugar, and stuff like carbon taxes, which includes like really, really high gas prices. So the question is, and this is the really interesting thing, United States, not the most dense country in the world, but we have 330 million people. We're out there. What would happen if we raised gas, if we taxed gas to the level that it's $9 a gallon? It'd be riotous. It'd be terrible. And a lot of people would complain. And that's because we are so reliant on gasoline and very cheap fuel. And so much of the country, apart from a few highly dense urban areas, I mean, and we can include the BART on this, and maybe we can include cities like Boston, New York, and to a certain extent, the metro in DC is pretty decent, depending on where you're going. But like, it's got we don't have a well-developed public transportation network that can adapt effectively to really, really high gas prices, which is why we have this sort of market-based situation we have now. And it's a really interesting situation. We could raise revenues that way and build them, but we also have one of the most expensive building regimes in the world in the United States. The Economist had an article, and I'll see if I can find it. And the United States, the cost per mile on tunnel projects is, let's see, is $1.3 billion. That is more than double the next most expensive country, which is Japan, then Germany, Canada, Mexico, South Korea, Italy, Chile. And indeed, it's 10 times more expensive to build a tunnel per mile in the United States than it is in Norway. And so we have an even bigger factor here. And let me drop this in here like it's hot. So I'll see if we can do it. So here's some data to back that up. And so, Colin, the other issue is that we, for regulation, labor, things like this, other aspects of this, whatever it is very expensive for us to build. And as a consequence, we don't. And so we can raise taxes here, but without the corresponding incentive to build a large amount of projects, it'll be very inefficient to do so. And that's the really hard part.
I see.
Oh, man.
Cars
Colin
are killing
says,
Americans.
Yes.
It's bad for our health. It's bad for our pollution. It's bad for our reliance on OPEC.
And it's really expensive to fix.
And it's expensive, and roads are bad, and everything.
Roads are bad. Everything's terrible. When I bring people from other countries, they're
like, we need to shift away from car-based economics.
I had some friends visiting from Europe, and they're like, your roads are terrible. I thought you're a car-based country. And I'm like, I know they are. But
We are.
We're doing the best we can. But I'm like, look at the size of my vehicle. I can fit 35 of you in this. And whatever I hit, I win. Right? No, it's terrible. So do Millet's methods work? Yes, if applied to the right economy, not absolutely, and they will not work forever. But yes, they will work right now in this space. He's probably the right guy to reform the economy and bring stabilization and encourage entrepreneurship in Argentina. But there's issues with that. And I'm not advocating that that's replicable to every economy. It's just the Argentinian economy was wrecked by a devastating inflation and currency crisis in the last couple of years that it made it impossible to do anything. So if it works now, great. I'm a practical person. I got to see what you're doing. Show me what works. Ankur says, Iana is I'm not economist or anything close, but I've always wondered how legislating a max-to-min income ratio would play out. Not saying whatever happened here, but still curious about it. Markets get weird when you try to interfere with them. This is the weird part. This is the paradox about all things. So the weird things is that when we think about ways, and I'm not advocating you become, a diehard capitalist or not a capitalist, whatever you want to do, whatever, choose your own adventure in life. I'm saying that of all the things that humanity has developed or created or provided, we do have a system that hypothetically, if we have a free market, it does a really good job at matching buyers and sellers. But sometimes that doesn't happen, and free markets can tend towards oligopolies. Oligopolies aren't free markets. That means there's power controlled in cartel situations. Monopolies are obviously not free markets. And so markets have to be managed to remain free, if that makes sense. That's the paradox within it. Because markets themselves, up to their own devices, dominant players take over, they provide things, they jack things up. This is how we've understood economics in the last 100 years. And so we debate the nature of how much of that incur that we can involve. And I suspect that things like legislating maximum minimum income ratios, people are very clever. When we legislate something, we close a door, but then people will climb up the window. The nature of compensation will change. You don't pay me in dollars, but you just paid me in 3,000 Maseratis instead. Thank you so much. That's so nice of you. Or some other derivative or some other issuance. It would be really hard to do that effectively. Albert says, when does the revolution begin? We're a country of temporarily embarrassed billionaires. Brett says, Brett says, only the little people take public transit. This is great. We have a good mixture of diehard, like people who are like, let's change the social system. People who are like the most bourgeois capitalists, like, ah, yes, where's a cigar? I need to put this out on an orphan or a widow. Aaron says, no, the time it takes to build public transit to have 500 BARTs would be 200 years. Possibly true. Oh, we got a Sean answer too. This is fun. I've heard the argument that raising the minimum wage can affect prices on goods. 10% increase in minimum wage. Yeah, that's true. That's what I'm saying too effectively. It just doesn't raise it enough. I'm catching up to all these things. I'm sorry if I missed these things. Trevor says, I wonder what Joby taxi system and high-speed rail nationwide will have on our oil and gas economy. That's really interesting. We'd have to develop that, build that, and make it happen. I suspect, though, like all things, it is an interesting thing. All transitions take time, and they're often generational, and it's frustrating when we look at it. But it seems quick in the context of history. Yes, I've been following with great detail the development of the California high-speed rail system. Marcia says the Japan cost to build is mind-blowing when you consider how many over-constructed work. That's exactly right. It is mind-blowing, Marcia. It's crazy. Albert says, I just looked at this and wonder if we need to stop voting yes on bonds and taxes. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, let's build nothing. Sorry, school and libraries. Oh, no. So Colin asked, thank you. I'm going down again. I'm up to 6:49 now. I'm 2 minutes off. Labor laws and union protections have a 90% off cost on tunnel projects. Does Norway's do something? They have so many tunnels, and the tunnels are fabulous. I was in the longest road tunnel in the world. I went to Norway. I was driving around. I heard the engineering is truly impressive, and they are really, really effective that way. And Reddit has a discussion about Norway and tunnel cost. That's great. That's good, Rachel. That's a subreddit that everybody can highlight. Make it your top 3 right now. Jessica says, think of the jobs for the transactions to get off the car-centered economy. Absolutely true. All those things. It just takes a very, very long time to do. Rail would be nice. Traveling by rail would be nice. So here's what we got for consumer prices across the world. On the right side is the physical percent change in inflation. This is what we quote all the time in economics and finance. On the left side is our physical increase in prices. As you see across the board, BU, the United States, comfortably in blue, second highest to the UK, or down in Japan, you've seen price increases regardless of where you are in the world. And this has been a negative thing for economies. Another thing where you've seen inflation, if you've got children, I got one, he's expensive. Childcare prices are rising rapidly, and this is something you're feeling. You need to take care of a child, and you got a job, and your significant other has a job. Tough schnoogies. You got to bring that child to work and put him to work too as a little tiny intern. This is terrible because consumer price index, if we look at food, housing, all CPI, transportation, childcare is up over 800% in the last 40 years. And how much income do we spend on childcare? I care about this because this is important. I didn't give this enough of a highlight. About 20%, 21% in places like Texas, 32% if you live in Vegas. I don't know why. Because it's hard. I figured it'd be cheaper in Vegas. You just kind of kids, you just deal them some chips, send them to the casino and pick them up later. Nobody has any questions. Surprisingly cheap in Iowa, 10%.
I mean, Nevada.
Oh, yeah, I know.
What is Nevada doing? Why is the childcare so expensive there?
What is Nevada doing has been a question asked by every Californian since 1849. WTF, Nevada? Yes, exactly. Yes, child labor, says Sean. That's the solution. This is why I love this audience. You guys are all sharp when it comes to economics.
Oh, Sean, that's true.
It could be that they have a lower income.
Yeah,
that's true. Yes, the poor Nevada.
Surprised.
It's interesting, the combination of the availability of labor. We don't have an answer for this. Why? Because it's a very labor-intensive thing to care for a child. As a consequence, that price has gone up. Productivity in this sector has not gone up. We've got some Baumol's cost disease action going on here because a person can't take care of 1 million children, but they can take care of a few, and that corresponding cost is added into those labor costs, et cetera. So higher tariffs raise the cost for businesses and consumers. Straight up, no doubts. As my son says, no cap, for real. Here's what we got. The majority of global trade is in intermediate goods. So when we talk about imports, we're talking about stuff businesses need to finish building stuff. And that passes right on to consumers. Also, back to the question about tax increases about highest Americans. Was that Jessica? Poorest Americans and under the Trump tax proposals, it's going to be interesting. We should actually see in the combination of available tax proposals and the best guess estimate of what's going to happen, we're going to see tax cuts for people earning above $360K a year, below $360K a year, which, as it turns out, and unsurprisingly, is most Americans, an increasing tax burden. And so some people view this as a positive thing because they view it as like a fair share percentage. In economics and finance, we look at relatives. We know that poor people spend more money on things like food and necessities than richer people do. And so this has typically a disproportionate impact on poor folks. Colin. Childcare costs are the best reminders for contraceptives, people. Colin, oh man. Oh, I can give you some others, but man, it's fun. It's good. It's very rewarding to be a parent. I have aged like 35 years in the last 10. So, and he's a great kid. I love my son, but man. So, share of home buyers and sellers by generation. So you're out there, you're looking at houses. Who's buying a house? Brett says 2 in college, might be late for that one. Oh, Nelly, better send him to someplace cheap. I suggest U&M, Brett. That's fine. We got it. Bring him right through the door here. We're just cutting prices left and right. So share of home buyers and sellers by generation. So right now, unexpectedly, most people selling homes are young boomers, old boomers, and Generation Xers. Most people buying homes are the highest percentage are Gen Xers, then older Generation Y millennials and younger Generation Z. Makes sense, typical, right? You're like older people have the homes, younger people have to buy the homes. But the market share of first-time home buyers has gone down from 50% in 2010 to 24% today. People who can afford to buy a home already got one. I already got one. Next, share of median income. And this is a really fun way to look at housing in, right now. The share of the median income greater than 30%. If you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, it's too much. For a whimsical period of time from 2009 to 2021, housing was affordable again. Since that time, before that time in 06 during the crisis, and right now, housing costs represent approximately 44% of median income, which is outrageous. Bam. Well, Ankur says, was just thinking about when I was in college shopping for myself back in the day. My first choice was a $20,000 per semester. Now it seems quaint. I know, it's crazy, right? All goes to us associate deans and managerial academics. We just sit here, piles of cash. So, Anand says, interesting numbers and charts. We share the slides. I sent them to Colin. I sent them to Albert. They can put those on blast, and they're all yours. You can take them, change my name, knock it off, whatever you need to do with it. Give this presentation yourself. Boom goes the dynamite. Reilly White. I don't believe. I'm a Reilitarian. I grab these from the internet. You grab them from me. It's just passing on the wealth. Now, one thing that's been interesting is that different metropolitan areas have been building at different rates. We know this. Who's terrible at building? California, San Francisco, Baltimore, San Diego, Pittsburgh, and LA. Terrible amounts of inventory added in apartments. That's why they remain expensive. Meanwhile, Phoenix, Salt Lake, Charlotte, Raleigh, and of course, Austin, Texas, has seen so many apartment completions happen that they're able to actually demonstrate a decline in prices. That's supply and demand for you. Michael says, I've always spent the majority of my income on housing. Oh my gosh, no problem. How is the 30% number come up with? It's sort of a thing. Oh, this is a good question. Holly brings up a good question. I want to bring up that too. So Michael says, I've always spent the majority of my income on housing, no problem. 30% number is considered, imagine a you have a basket of goods. You want to take vacations, do other things. 30% income is fine. Indeed, if you don't want to eat and you can grow it on your own property and you're self-sustainable, you can spend 98% of your income on housing. It just makes most people uncomfortable because of this sense of what they want to do with their life. Now, this is interesting. So luxury apartments, yes. Does the completion of luxury apartments reduce overall prices? And it does, according to 2 studies that have come out in the last few years. One was in Finland and one was somewhere else, but I forget where. But the Finnish study is interesting. So what happens is when you build a lot of luxury apartments, people that are occupying spaces that middle-income people would normally live in move to those luxury apartments, freeing up space in the middle-income houses for people to move in with actual middle incomes that are being taken up by really wealthy people. In the same sense, this actually creates a chain that actually creates a positive effect and a reduction in real estate prices. So don't frown when you see a luxury apartment going up. Be like, that's inventory. That's taken units. People are going to be in there, but they're going to be freeing up units that should be filled with middle-class people and other folks as well. So it does have positive effects. Albert says, that's why you can buy half an acre with 5 beds, 4 baths, and a game room in Raleigh for $450K. Wow.
What's so the discussion on housing supply, I think I had it with a friend the other day who's like a development planner.
Yes.
And I brought up NIMBYism, and then what he brought up was other developers are trying to deregulate housing, I guess, coding and standards, which is, I guess, the goal of the problem. So where would you say is the core of the problem that is
it's a lot of things. Yeah,
bottlenecking the supply?
So for instance, the approval process, right? And you can use California as an example, right? So we know that there's been a lot of proactive nature to build inventory. Well, you have that very stringent environmental law that allows people to contest certain projects. And that takes years, and that adds years to completion time and years to development. And so for states like California and those places, it is primarily regulatory that is impeding that growth. And I know there are things, here's the thing, there are trade-offs in society. We have to value certain things, and that's a real talk that everybody needs to have. So whether you are a entity with or a state with high amounts of regulation that have all the best purposes behind it, if you're interfering with the affordability of the housing market in such a way that you're driving people away from your state, you should reconsider some of those rules. And so there's a fine line between what's good regulation and bad. And so most fundamentally, Colin, my most dangerous political opinion that I possess is that you should be able to build. I'm a big fan of people having equity in houses. I believe that's a source of wealth. It has a bunch of positive health outcomes. And I'm the ultimate yes in my backyard kind of guy. And I fight with people all the time on this. And as a consequence, I'd say, as long as the structure was safe, build it. That's my controversial overarching policy. And I'd be really interested in them. Jessica says regulatory spaghetti code here in California. That's true. I've heard that too. Rachel says convert dead malls into housing. That's a good idea. That can be really expensive too, because think about all those bathrooms, the additional, infrastructure there. It can be really, really expensive to refab something. And our anchor says, what about when prices are artificially inflated? That's interesting. It depends on the market and what artificially inflated means. And so artificial inflation happens because the market isn't open enough and people are, and something isn't, and supply and demand can't work the right way, right? But I don't know what I never find that a bit more. I gotta know what you mean. Mixed use zoning, 100%. So this is, but to answer all of this issue, the zoning, the regulations, the environment, even well-intended environmental legislation has put such a cap on this that literally we've gotten in our own way into solving affordability issues for Americans in the low and middle income groups. Unless you are physically in a position that you have a house that you bought 30 years ago, or you're inheriting one, which again, cheers, congratulations, yay. But you should be active about this. And this is a unique factor of the Anglosphere world. We all have this same series of problems. But you go to other countries, go to Japan, go to Osaka, you got $400 a month apartments everywhere. You just, wherever you want to do. And I'm not advocating we have that solution. We need the American version of what that is, but you can't do that when you have all of these regulations and rules. And that's hard. And it's not, and some of them are really well intended. I mean, I don't want to, climate's a big deal. We want to get rid of it. But we also got to build things. And we got to build density. And then that's the other answer too, is that people out here are like, well, in New Mexico, it's a water issue, right? Agriculture uses about 75% of the water in New Mexico, but 10% is used for homes. We could actually double our population and only increase the water usage 10% at the current rate. But we build density, that's a more efficient use of water. Build up. Build up. Anyway, share of job postings and searches on Indeed. This is an interesting factor for you all. We're looking at hybrid being in this as an incentive. Another sign of the weakening market. Hybrid, is it fun? Can you work from home? Fewer people are noticing they got to come back to work, and we're seeing it in the job market indices. Only 7% of job postings mention hybrid or remote terms. Fascinating. So, labor productivity growth overall, United States, we are rocking and rolling it over the last 10 years. Our labor productivity, output per hour worked, is, and this is a Joe Politano chart. It's got that dark color. He's a fun person to follow, Joseph Politano, on X or other media applications. We are beating G7 for increases in labor productivity. Hooray! But at the same time, we have to sustain this meaningfully over the next few years. And this is why we've seen so much inflation in our general economic mood, everything from the nature of how successful our companies are, et cetera, et cetera. Now, back to the Bay Area real quick. San Francisco on the left, San Jose on the right. You can't read this unless you're in the cheap seats. If you're on your phone, I apologize. Here's what this says. Overall, unemployment rate in San Francisco and San Jose dropped in September. Remember, metro area employment rates are a month behind. They're down at 4.3% and 4.1%. But we didn't see a corresponding increase in jobs in this meaningful sectors, i.e. information lost 1,000 jobs in San Francisco. It lost almost 2,000 jobs in San Jose, Sunnyvale, Santa Clara. And so you have issues in the Bay Area that extend beyond this, where we did see hiring was government. And we didn't see hiring in a lot of other places. And I suspect we'll see a further decline in unemployment in the next year in this area. So let's tie it all together. I got some questions that I got to answer that I haven't gotten to yet. I had to blow off the dust, so I apologize. We answered the details on tech layoffs in the beginning. We talked about engineering specialties. Will the Fed continue to cut rates? We talked about that. They may not if inflation ekes up a little bit or inflation returns in the form of that. What actions can we take to address job inflation domestically, aside from seeking employment abroad? Make stuff cheaper, make housing cheaper is my biggest thing. What sectors do you think will benefit the most from the new administration? Right now, I'm going to stick with healthcare immediately. Apart from this, it is an open market because we have to see which particular sectors the new administration will choose to favor with lower tariffs or greater tariffs, depending on the way they look at this. Where won't the jobs be? We'll see a return to information sector jobs if the rates go down. But there are so many things that can go sideways in the next 2 years. And so it's difficult for us to address. And so Jessica says, Aaron shares space and space. Yeah, that's true. Surrender to young adults. Good discussion between Aaron and Jessica here too. Holly says, how's unemployment counted if payments just stop, but the worker is still looking? Good question. So unemployment will be determined by a survey, and we'll ask workers, are you looking for a job? So even if your payments stop, you should still be considered unemployed if you indicate via the survey, which is a very small survey, about 60,000 people or so. And they survey the country and they say, are you looking for a job or are you out of work? And they determine the unemployment rate from that. And so it's a sample size that's statistically significant, but it is one that should count it if you say you're in the labor market looking for work. The only place where it wouldn't be is if it said for a second, hey, I'm not in the labor market. I'm not looking for work. I've left the job market, F you job market. Then at that point, you would not be considered unemployed. You'd be considered not in the labor market, which is a great question.
What if you have a job, but you're looking for a second job?
Oh, yes, then you're employed, but also discouraged and possibly angry. You possibly could be included, broadly speaking, on that U1 through U6. There's 6 unemployment rates. We only quote U3, U4, U5, U6 includes like underemployment, discouraged workers. Sean's got it right. And so you'd be underemployed. So we talked about the tariffs. Does a Trump presidency reduce the likelihood of rate cutting or rate hiking? I think right now it reduces the likelihood of rate cutting. I think if inflation goes up, we'll have to hike rates again. And that would be bad news bears for the economy and the job market. So there's a lot of worries right now. And I suspect there'll be pain before it gets better. And it all depends on the nature of what's bluster and what's truth in the incoming administration. Aaron's has been, that's such, sorry. Aaron says, I've been a U6 guy since the late 90s. Yeah, you thought about this. Yeah, you thought U2 was just an Irish band. They're talking about the unemployment rate. They're very enthusiastic. In the 80s, it was all about U2. Now, U6, late 90s. Oh, man. That's great. It's like your U2 cover band, Aaron. Still haven't found what he's looking for. I love being a dad. Lots of dad jokes. But bump. Albert, so what are the odds of recession in the next 18 months? 37% precisely. Good question.
Wait, how did we arrive at that number?
I made it up because like I'm a finance guy. It's what we do. I'm sorry, but that's a good question. So in essence, it will be, so if we input a lot of tariffs and we do those things, it will be, and the Fed has to be forced in a position where we increase inflation. All of this, by the way, would take a very long time to realize. It would be like steering a battleship. It'd be a year and a half before we recognize something. It's not going to end with an apocalypse in January or February, but we could go down the path of Apocalypse Mountain. Not apocalypse, but a recessionary situation. But then we'd correct it, and that would be tricky. Holly says, does it matter? We've been on the brink of recession since the pandemic. What is more uncertainty? That's right. That's absolutely true. Does it matter? Oh, I think it does fundamentally. I think I'm interested. I think I'm interested in seeing. Before this, I was 98.8% confident we would stick the soft landing on this. And right, it's just the market is risky, and risk is a cost. Risk is something we have to account for in the markets. And so now we've added risk to the market. And the nature of this risk is a good question, because it may, who knows, maybe the Trump administration will embark upon a number of policies that will improve the economy in the long run or make the government more efficient or whatever. But it's going to cause, it's hard to see that pathway without some pain, at least initially. And that's a really, really good question. So this is cool. So I appreciate this. Ankur says, I wish we had any period of time without having to think about the next election. Have a better idea of the direction by April. Holly's right. Bam. Boom goes down. A+, Holly. Yeah. Recessions are good for economy, says the man worth $200 billion. That's right.
I'm surprised he would say that like out loud.
I'm not. I actually don't follow him on Twitter, but I read a lot of his tweets or his X's. I follow an X.
His
They keep
shits.
coming up. I think I'm part of this thing. I have to see what's going on. It's interesting in his mind. But it's interesting. So many interesting things. It's not bad for us to look at government efficiency, though, conceptually. But the nature of how we do it is tricky, which is why. But who knows? We do have to think about the amount of revenue we bring in and how we spend it.
By the way, your slides, you closed them or something.
I did close. I've no more, Colin.
Oh,
I'm out of slides.
well,
Do economists use Blue Sky, Twitter, or both? I don't know. We don't use a lot of things these days. A lot of people are doing Blue Sky now, I'm hearing. I mean, I don't know. What is the other one? Threads? I can't figure that. I just lurk in the dark on that one. I don't know. So this is a tricky question. Holly asks, so jobs expect downward spiral to February. There's nothing to suggest our trajectory is going to change. What needs to happen is the Fed needs to continue to cut rates. And if nothing changes in the economy and the Fed continue to cut rates through next year, that would ignite some spark in the economy and get us hiring again in a meaningful way. And what I'm looking for as a transitionary period is that consumer health improves. Right now, it isn't. We're taking on more debt, credit card debt's higher. And when credit card debt starts to lower or level off, then yes, I will give that and say we're on the trajectory on the up and up. But until that happens, I can't get there. The Saddam of tech. Ooh, man, this is fun. This is good. Thread, same. This is interesting. Rachel says, I don't think the people looking at efficiency are going to be thinking about long-term impact of their choices. That's true. It's tricky. There's these things. Oh, Albert says, I'm with Dr. White. Oh, thank you. That's nice. It's impossible to say. Jessica says, what's the effect of a California diaspora to less strong economies with it to less strong, weaker Californias in the economy? I love that. I love that sense of place. I love Jessica's like, well, we're obviously one of the largest economies in the world in those peasant states we go into. I like it. It's approach. Know where you are. So it's a good question. I think we're going to keep seeing it because right now in this effect is you have to somehow change the calculus. California is, by all sense of the term, a desirable place to live. You've got wonderful weather, a climate, scenery, all this fun stuff. But at the same time, your cost of living is prohibitive and it's affecting firms and other things. But at the same time, it's not sunshine and rainbows in places like Austin right now either. They're seeing cuts in their tech sector and other issues. And so tech cuts are happening everywhere, regardless of this, whether they're in Texas or Tennessee or California. And we're seeing that just everywhere. Fed will cut 25 bips in December. I agree. 50 in March, maybe, if inflation doesn't start kicking upward, but I don't think it will.
With, without getting
Yes.
political,
Yeah.
how much power or how much influence does the president actually have on the economy? Because I think
Depends.
the Federal
Yeah.
Reserve acts independently, right?
Yes. So he can't control the Fed. The Fed will go up and down in rates. That's a big bear. But the Fed, so this is the thing, right? So it's not just the president, it's Congress, it's legislation. So Congress has the power over the long run to have a big influence on the economy, but that requires legislation, deals, other things. We got out of the COVID recession due to $5 trillion of stimulus spending, driven, of course, by congressional approvals over some very targeted bills. And they can do that. And it is interesting to see because there is such a, because we do, I mean, really, we have to talk about things like efficiency, but there's a frustration here because there will be some question as to what extent the president can unilaterally determine things like tariffs. My understanding is that is a judicial debate right now. So we can say that, oh, is this an executive order where I say 10% tariffs across the board? Or is this something where, I need legislative approval? I was reading something that suggested that itself was a question. So I would view that as being a very powerful maneuver. Even if it's disagreeable to the economy, it is no doubtedly powerful. So the president has some very strong cards up his sleeve that he can use. And that's interesting. God, look at this funness in this comment section. See, you guys are all, I love the San Francisco Bay Area because you're like you're all practically academics. You're all like troubled geniuses with like fun things and good hobbies and a lot of economic nerds. I love it. It's my favorite part about this. So Trump on tariffs. So this is the thing. It's not about tariffs, Sean, to that point, but there were tariffs and Biden was a fan of tariffs too. He kept a bunch of them. We've moved away from that. Those all have costs to the economy and they've all cost the economy. And the question is the magnitude of tariffs. And if we just increase them to the magnitude that we expect that he's going to do, then that will be immensely powerful and immensely negative. So we'll see what happens. Man, this is great. You guys are so great. Thank you for Christmas. Oh man. Econ 101 at Harvard. Not fun. R&D. But he did write the textbook. R&D investment is very weak, too concentrated in too few industries. Aaron has a good point. Oh yeah, this is cool, by the way. Aaron's linking you to, if you really want to nerd out, go into Damodaran's NYU webpage, which Aaron links to, because he's got a team of these research analysts that compile this data for him. But he's got a whole bunch of data on R&D per industry, and you get a sense of this as well, and where R&D spending was in the last few years. And it's a great chart because you can see how your industry has been affected by changes in R&D. Good chart. God, you guys are great. That's great. All right. Any last questions? Or we cash out and hope for the best. Oh. Yeah, Baruch Lev, absolutely.
I think because we're looking at so much uncertainty here for the next few months.
For the next few years.
And years. I mean, however you look at it. Like I felt like Harris, right, was your straight line to at least some of economic certainty.
Straight line of predictability with Harris. Absolutely. Right. Very predictable. Thank you, guys.
But with this level of unpredictability that we have on tap, how does someone think about the job market? Is it just you pray every night and hope that something happens? At least
I,
your mouth is getting blown
I
out.
don't know. The people I've been talking to this week, I feel I feel like that's what they've been doing.
Yeah.
Thank you for the nice words, everybody, too. But this is really interesting. To answer that question for the job market now. So wishing and hoping is one thing. Do distinguish your resume. And I'm going to say this a few different specific ways. Number one, upskill. Do that thing, do that certificate, do that thing you're thinking of doing, but you haven't done before. Invest in yourself. Number two, distinguish yourself on a stack of 100 resumes. Put something personal in there on your one-page resume that gives me a sense that you're not just a walking computer machine. What's your hobby? What is your passion? What are you motivated to do? I want to hear it. I want to see it. I want to make sure that I can see on that paper that it's really cool that you were the Marin County chess champion from 1987, or that you were a snowboarder, or that you do this, or you run marathons, or you do other things. You're all very interesting people. You've all gone on a journey to get to the position that you are now. Put a line down there next to where you say, yes, I'm good at Python and all those other magic things. Put a line down there that says, hey, what are you as a person? Because then as a hiring manager, that's something I remember and I do. And that was an advice from somebody I got years ago who hires for big firms. Another thing as well that I heard from somebody in the industry, watch out if you're a tech company, and this is somebody who I trust very well so, but she was telling me, and she said, watch out in the industry for firms that are starting to cut back on recruiters. Watch out for that lack of recruitment, lack of investment, lack of looking for jobs in the marketplace. Warning sign on how the firm's doing, how the firm's looking at its future and where you are right now. So keep an eye on the prize, make yourself better, but at the same time, do stay wary and stay smart. Nothing is guaranteed in life.
Yeah, because I look at how when I worked in the HR technology space, there would always be this talk that we'd be moving to a gig economy and all of that stuff. And I feel like we're setting ourselves up for that because of just how things are going. The cost of everything going up, everybody becoming their own businesses, the arrival of AI and everything in between. And so, you know, I think people look at what they voted for the next well they voted for what they wanted, which was lower costs. But, and I feel like I'm going to start a blog called Downstream Effects, that literally just talks about everything else that's going to happen as an additional occurrence. And so instead of getting our cheaper costs, we're going to get a roller coaster ride. And maybe that's why I wake up a little bit nervous every day, because it looks weird out there.
Really could go anywhere. And that's the really interesting part. And
Yeah.
there's always things when you rip a Band-Aid off of anything, even if it's done in such a way that it will benefit us in 5 years, it'll hurt
Yeah.
in the meantime. And it's gonna hurt. And that's the downside. Holly's like, bid for government work now.
Yeah, because I feel like the only sure thing I could probably say that will happen the next 4 years is you buy Tesla, you buy Amazon stock, you go all in on cryptocurrency, and then maybe you go in on hard assets because inflation will be back and on its way. As for everything else, I mean, it's all up in the air. And I know, Dr. White, you're the crypto expert here too, right? So I no doubt that you probably have thought about this current bull run that we're heading into and probably going to really be a part of in the next couple of years.
Oh, it's been a ride. So this is fun. The best part about assets that have questionable value, and this is fun. It's fun to fool around in that market and deal with it. Is we're going to see, of course. So of course, when we look at the question of anything that calls itself a currency or a commodity, I wrote a paper a few years back that said, hey, this thing is it a technology? Is it a currency? Is it a commodity? It behaves, it's its own asset class. It's like anything else. And it goes up and down in a contrarian way, depending on the government at stake and other things. So it's a regulation play, it's another play, but fundamentally, what won't change in the market in the next few years, our fundamental assets will still maintain value. And
Mhm.
so what's challenging for us, I think, from an investment side, crypto is going to be interesting. It'll be up and down. It'll be every time Doge is mentioned, it'll go up, which is why, I mean, full disclosure, I hold a little bit of it because I find it very fun to watch that thing go up every time Elon Musk posts something. But on the other side of this, you've got the Magnificent Seven stocks, one of the greatest periods of concentration we've had in the stock market in a very long time. Global dominators, and there's a lot of reasons why they're there, but also there's a lot of evidence to suggest they can't sustain that over the long run. And so it's going to be a very interesting play how the market pans out. And earnings, of course. You got to follow NVIDIA, as Albert points out, coming up.
Yeah.
What does so since we're on the topic of cryptocurrency, the incoming president-elect has stated he wants a strategic reserve of Bitcoin. Do we expect that to be good for the crypto market? Do we
That's an interesting.
It'll be our stock.
Why would, so let's talk about that. Why would one maintain a strategic reserve of Bitcoin? Because you think it has some tangible value that you can use. Now, Bitcoin, we know, and this is the interesting part about Bitcoin, is like gold, unlike some like Ethereum has an infinite supply. Bitcoin Ether has an infinite supply. Bitcoin is its supply is fixed. We know there's only going to be 21 million of these suckers by 2140. And so as a consequence, Bitcoin is always going to be supply constrained. And so the question is why we would do this. We can hold, one reason that people buy crypto is, the question is first, will it be a national currency somewhere? Not in a big not in a big country sense. Maybe in like Venezuela or a country that's struggling or going through a wartime period, they'll do it. But there's other options that are cheaper and easier to transact with. But the other question when you have to think about that in crypto is, one of the values of this is hedonic value, the joy of buying something. So while you buy a signed baseball card or a jersey from your favorite athlete or something else, it's not the cheapest piece of clothing. It doesn't keep you warm the best. And if you buy a signed baseball, it's not like it's a better baseball. It's a physical baseball. But because it has the name of your favorite baseball star on it, you can have that thing and it's worth something to you because it brings you joy. Bitcoin works that way. Dogecoin works that way. A lot of this works that way in that space. So it's like creating a reserve for signed baseball cards or Pokemon cards that are rare. You know, it's like a strange thing that you have, like, yes, it has value, but it has value in that same, in the hedonic space more than it has in the economic space. And that may change. And indeed, it's at, I think in 10 years or 20 years, we'll find solutions to this that will make some things valuable, but it will probably, it may not be Bitcoin. So weird is what I would say. I'd say that would be a interesting use of government funds. But
And
I
what
think the
happens when
aspect
we
of creating a
buy-
reserve would increase, would drive the price up. So
And what happens when we
say.
buy so much Bitcoin, but we're also so over invested in
Beanie Babies. Anchor.
data centers and the power goes and we can't access our Bitcoin? What happens then?
Yeah, what if they take it and we can't get it because I left my all my passcode keys on my in my house, which I sold you know to, no, you're absolutely right, or these other things that happen. So the data center thing, the compilation of data, the energy is another thing as well, right? So the Biden administration, Aaron sent me this plan to build more nuclear reactors on the horizon from the Biden administration through 2050. That's good. We have to enter an area of energy abundance to fund a lot of these things like data centers and our hunger for data. And so if you're looking at things in the next couple of decades, we got to focus on energy abundance has to be paramount in that equation for things like data centers, for things like crunching things to even run crypto, but also keep AI moving along and all that other stuff. So there's a lot of buys here. Jessica says it drives me insane that we're moving on climate change at the same time we have crypto and AI. I know. This is true. It's an insane time.
The power consumption of AI is insane. Google's buying like nuclear power plants just to fuel it. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's gonna happen.
Chernobyl
Yeah.
crypto edition, Chernobyl AI edition, you know? Yeah. Not great, not terrible. Yeah. So with 2 minutes left, does anyone else have any additional questions? And if not, Dr. White, your final thoughts on what we should watch for in the next month, the next time we meet. That date,
Oh, yes.
we will have official electoral college tallies complete.
Yes.
And
I don't think we'll see any
verify.
surprises there, but yes, that's right.
Yeah.
But I think things to watch for the next month. Watch for the jobs report. Watch for the inflation report. Inflation we don't want ticking upward, and jobs we want to bounce back a little bit from the hopefully temporary low that we saw this month. And if it is disappointing, bad news bears, but also maybe hope for bigger cuts are on the horizon. So keep an eye on those things. A whole bunch of economic news coming out across the board. Look at the transition. Look at the signals coming from the administration and Elon Musk as well. Yeah.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And we've got more speculation in the chat here. So for those of you who joined us today, I'm going to go ahead and close it here. This webinar is recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. Go check it out. We've got 1,700 subscribers now and lots of career videos for you to watch. We've got our webinar next month as well, with the date yet to be finalized. But if you have questions, think on them and come back and we'll talk about what those mean for the economy and your job search ahead. Until next time, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. This is our last webinar. Until then, we're thankful for all of you joining us today, and we hope to see you all again soon. Bye-bye.